Welcome to our deep dive into Peronism. This is a fascinating topic, and you've sent over a really interesting mix of sources, so thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so it looks like we have like a Peronism handbook, I guess you could call it.
Right.
Some of Peron's speeches, and even a Peronism for beginners piece. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, a good overview.
Yeah, it compares it to other systems, which I thought was a good way to kind of frame it. We've got a lot to cover, though, so let's just jump right in.
Okay.
When we talk about Peronism, what exactly are we dealing with here?
Well, Peronism is often labeled as a political ideology, but it's a lot more complex than that. I think it's more of a social movement that's really deeply intertwined with Argentina's history and its identity. And to really grasp its essence, we need to consider the context in which it emerged.
All right, so let's rewind the clock then. Early 20th century Argentina.
Okay.
Paint me a picture. What's going on?
So imagine a nation on the cusp of economic transformation. Argentina at the time was experiencing really rapid growth. It was fueled by agricultural exports.
Okay.
But the wealth wasn't trickling down. You had a very stark divide between this small, wealthy elite and the masses, particularly the growing urban working class and the rural poor.
I see.
And so this inequality bred a lot of social unrest.
Makes sense.
There was really a yearning for change.
Yeah, and so that's where Juan Perón enters the scene, right?
Precisely. Perón emerges as this charismatic leader who tapped into this discontent. And he promised to empower the people, particularly the working class,
Okay.
to create a more just and equitable society. And the handbook you provided really emphasizes this, referring to Peronism as a popular doctrine, a doctrine of the people.
Yeah, no, I noticed that too. There were a couple of phrases that really jumped out at me, like conductor of nationality and action conjugated with pueblo.
Right.
It seems like Peronism was all about aligning itself with the common man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Perón really masterfully utilized rhetoric that resonated with the masses.
Okay.
He really positioned himself as the champion of the downtrodden, fighting against the privileged elite and foreign powers.
Yeah.
But the question is, how did this translate into actual policy?
Right.
Did Peronism merely preach populism, or did it offer concrete solutions?
Well, the handbook also outlines a set of truths that underpin Peronist doctrine.
Yeah.
One that I thought was particularly interesting was true democracy is the one where the government does what the people want and defends a single interest, the interest of the people.
Right.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
Sure.
But then it goes on to say Peronism is a social principle.
Yeah.
Any political affront to it is anti-popular and therefore not Peronist. So, doesn't that contradict the idea of democratic plurality?
Yeah.
How can opposing Peronism automatically equate to being against the people?
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
And this tension between democratic ideals and this strong, almost unquestionable ideology is a recurring theme in Peronism's history. It really raises the question, did Peronism truly represent the will of the people, or did it impose its own vision under the guise of popular mandate?
There's also this comparison that caught my eye in the Peronism for Beginners source, juxtaposing Peronism with both capitalism and communism. It explicitly states capitalism, it is exploitation of man by man, and then it says communism, it is exploitation of man by the state.
Interesting.
So it seems Peronism aimed to distance itself from both of these systems.
Yes, Peronism sought to carve out its own distinct path, what they called a third way.
Okay, so if they weren't pro-capitalist and they weren't pro-communist, what were they advocating for? What did this third way look like in practice?
They envisioned a kind of mixed economy where the state played a strong role in regulating markets and protecting workers, but also allowed for private enterprise. It's a delicate balancing act, promoting social justice and national interests while trying to avoid the pitfalls of both unfettered capitalism and state control.
That makes me think of the historical context again. Argentina at the time was heavily reliant on agricultural exports with a lot of foreign investment. And in Perón's speeches, he often emphasizes the need for economic independence.
Right.
So did this push for a third way stem from a purely pragmatic response to Argentina's specific circumstances, or were there deeper philosophical underpinnings at play?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
It's likely a combination of both. Perón was undoubtedly a pragmatist seeking solutions that address the immediate needs of Argentina. But we can also find echoes of broader intellectual currents in his thinking, For instance, the idea of finding a middle ground between individualism and collectivism,
Okay.
between capitalist free markets and socialist state planning, was something that resonated with intellectuals and policymakers all across the world at that time.
So Peronism wasn't just an isolated phenomenon, but part of a larger global conversation about alternative models of social and economic organization. Makes you wonder if this search for a third way was specific to that historical moment or a recurring theme throughout history. But before we delve deeper into that, I think it's crucial to understand how this third way actually manifested in Perón's policies. Let's take a look at some of the concrete actions his government took.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
We can start with his economic policies. One of the hallmarks of Peronism was the nationalization of key industries.
Hold on, before we go there, I want to understand something. This handbook talks about Peronism being inherently democratic, but there are also these hints of a strong, singular ideology.
Yeah?
How did that play out in Perón's leadership style? Did he govern as a consensus builder or more as a strongman figure?
That's a crucial aspect to consider, and it leads us directly into one of the most controversial and debated aspects of Peronism. Perón, while undeniably popular, exhibited a distinct tendency towards strongman rule. He consolidated power, often sidelining opposing voices and centralizing authority. This approach, while effective in pushing through his agenda, also raised concerns about the erosion of democratic checks and balances.
That's a stark contrast to the image of Peronism as a purely democratic movement.
Right.
Seems like a real contradiction there.
Precisely. And this duality is at the heart of much of the debate surrounding Peronism.
Yeah.
On one hand, Perón implemented policies that genuinely improved the lives of many Argentines, particularly the working class.
Yeah.
He increased wages, expanded Social Security, and implemented worker protections that were groundbreaking for the time.
You can really see that in the speeches we have.
Yeah.
There's a powerful emotional appeal to his rhetoric.
Absolutely.
He talks about creating a new Argentina, a nation where everyone feels a sense of belonging and contributes to the collective good.
He fostered this sense of unity through mass rallies and impassioned speeches that appealed to national pride.
Right.
His wife, Evita, played a key role in this as well. She championed social justice, particularly for women and the poor, becoming a powerful symbol of Peronism's commitment to the people.
It's clear they were a force to be reckoned with, but this strong man approached this emphasis on a single unifying figure and a singular ideology. It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where was the space for dissent or alternative viewpoints?
That's the dark side of Peronism.
Yeah.
As Perón consolidated power, he became increasingly intolerant of opposition. Political opponents were suppressed, the press was censored, and dissent was met with hostility.
Okay.
This authoritarian turn tarnished Peronism's image and had lasting consequences for Argentine democracy.
Okay, so we have this complex picture. Emergent Peronism offers a third way, distinct from capitalism and communism. It delivers tangible social and economic improvements for many, yet it also exhibits authoritarian tendencies that stifle dissent.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory aspects?
That's the challenge with understanding Peronism. It's a movement with a legacy full of both triumphs and tragedies.
Right.
And its impact on Argentina is multifaceted and continues to be debated to this day.
Well, speaking of impact, let's dive into the specifics of Perón's economic policies.
Okay.
We've touched on nationalization, but I'm curious to understand the scope and rationale behind it.
Yeah.
What industries were targeted and what were the intended outcomes?
Perón's nationalization program was ambitious,
Okay.
aiming to bring key sectors of the economy under state control. Railways, utilities, and even the central bank were nationalized.
Wow.
He argued that this was essential to break free from foreign economic domination and ensure that these vital industries serve the interests of the Argentine people, not foreign investors.
Sounds like a bold move, a real assertion of economic sovereignty.
It was.
But did it work? Did nationalization achieve its intended goals?
The results were mixed.
Okay.
On the one hand, nationalization did give the Argentine government greater control over key sectors of the economy.
Okay.
This allowed them to invest in infrastructure, expand social programs, and promote industrial growth.
And on the other hand, were there any negative consequences to this approach?
Nationalization also led to increased bureaucracy and inefficiency in some cases.
Right.
Additionally, the expropriation of foreign-owned companies strained Argentina's relationships with international investors, making it harder to attract foreign capital in the future.
So a bit of a trade-off then.
Yeah.
Short-term gains in terms of control and investment, but potentially long-term consequences for economic stability and international relations.
Precisely. And this highlights the complexity of Peronism's economic legacy.
Yeah.
There were undeniable successes, but also unintended consequences that had a lasting impact on Argentina's development trajectory.
We've talked a lot about Perón's economic policies and his strongman approach to leadership, but I'm curious about how sustainable this model was in the long run.
Okay.
What happened to Peronism after Perón himself left the scene?
That's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Peronism proved to be remarkably resilient,
Really?
surviving multiple coups, political upheavals, and even Perón's own exile. It became deeply embedded in Argentine society and continued to evolve long after its founder was gone.
So it wasn't just a personality cult that faded away when Perón left the picture.
Not at all. Peronism transformed into a complex and multifaceted political movement, with different factions interpreting and applying its core principles in diverse ways.
Okay.
This adaptability is a key reason for its enduring influence.
That's fascinating. So Peronism wasn't a static ideology frozen in time, but rather a dynamic force that adapted to changing circumstances.
Exactly. And to fully understand this evolution, we need to delve into the period after Perón's first departure from power.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock again.
Right.
Perón is overthrown in a military coup in 1955. What happens next? Does Peronism simply disappear, or does it go underground and reemerge in a new form?
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
The military government that overthrew Perón attempted to eradicate Peronism, banning the movement and persecuting its supporters. But Peronism was deeply rooted in Argentine society, particularly among the working class who had benefited from Perón's policies.
Right.
It went underground, becoming a potent force of opposition to the military regime.
So even when suppressed, the movement persisted.
Yeah.
That speaks volumes about its hold on the Argentine people. But
Oh, yeah.
how did it eventually return to the political mainstream?
The military government faced growing economic and social challenges,
Okay.
and Peronism's appeal as an alternative grew stronger. In 1973, amid widespread unrest, elections were held.
Okay.
And Perón, after years in exile, was allowed to return and stand as a candidate.
And I'm guessing he won by a landslide?
He did. Perón's return was a triumphant moment for his supporters.
Wow.
He took office for a third time, but his health was failing,
Oh, no.
and he died less than a year later.
So a bittersweet victory for Peronism.
Yeah.
Their leader was back, but only for a short time. What happened to the movement after Perón's death? Did it fracture without his unifying presence?
That's a pivotal point in Peronism's history. Perón's third wife, Isabel Perón, succeeded him as president, but she lacked his political acumen and charisma. Her government was plagued by infighting and economic instability.
So without Perón at the helm, the movement started to unravel.
In a way, yes, the internal divisions within Peronism became more pronounced, and the movement struggled to maintain unity.
Right.
This instability created an opening for the military, and in 1976, Isabel Perón was overthrown in another coup.
Another coup, another period of military rule. It seems like Argentina's history is marked by this recurring cycle of democracy and authoritarianism.
It is a tragic pattern, and the coup of 1976 ushered in one of the darkest chapters in Argentina's history.
Oh, wow.
The military junta that seized power implemented a brutal campaign of repression known as the Dirty War, targeting anyone suspected of leftist or Peronist sympathies.
That's a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the fragility of democratic institutions. But amidst this darkness, did Peronism manage to survive?
It did, but in a fragmented and weakened state. The Dirty War decimated its ranks, forcing many into exile or silence.
Wow.
The experience of the Dirty War had a profound impact on the movement, forcing it to confront its own internal contradictions and the legacy of Perón's authoritarian tendencies.
So a period of reckoning for Peronism. It seems like a lot changed for the movement during this turbulent period.
Definitely.
How did it reemerge after the fall of the military junta in 1983? Did it manage to rebuild and regain its influence?
The return to democracy in 1983 marked a new chapter for Peronism, a chance for the movement to redefine itself.
Okay.
But the legacy of the Dirty War cast a long shadow, and the divisions within Peronism remained.
So Peronism enters the post-junta era, scarred but not defeated. It seems like we've reached a crucial turning point in the story.
Indeed. This is where Peronism's remarkable adaptability comes into play again.
Okay.
It had to confront its past, reconcile its internal divisions, and find a way to remain relevant in a rapidly changing world.
Right.
And that's exactly what it did.
Okay, so Peronism is trying to find its footing in this new democratic landscape. But how does a movement so closely tied to one man, Juan Perón, adapt and move forward without him?
That's the fascinating thing about Peronism. It's never been a monolithic ideology.
Hmm.
Even during Perón's lifetime, there were different interpretations of his ideas
Okay.
and varying approaches to implementing them.
So it wasn't a case of Perón dictating a rigid doctrine from the top down.
Not at all. Peronism was always a coalition of diverse groups,
Okay.
labor unions, industrialists, intellectuals, and even elements of the military.
Interesting.
Each of these groups brought their own perspectives and priorities to the movement.
That makes a lot of sense. A broad-based movement like that is bound to have internal tensions and disagreements.
Right.
But how did these different strands of Peronism coexist, especially after Perón was gone?
It was a process of negotiation, adaptation, and sometimes outright conflict.
Wow.
Different Peronist leaders emerged,
Okay.
each emphasizing certain aspects of Perón's legacy while downplaying others. Some lean more to the left, embracing social justice and a strong role for the state in the economy.
Okay.
Others leaned more to the right, emphasizing nationalism, traditional values, and a more market-oriented approach.
So Peronism became less about adhering to a fixed set of principles and more about navigating this complex web of alliances and ideologies.
Exactly, and this ability to adapt and evolve is a key reason for Peronism's remarkable staying power. It's constantly reinventing itself,
Okay.
drawing on different aspects of its history and ideology to appeal to new generations and address changing circumstances.
That's fascinating. It's like Peronism is this ever-shifting puzzle,
Right.
constantly reconfiguring its pieces to fit the political landscape.
That's a great analogy, and this fluidity has allowed Peronism to remain relevant in Argentine politics long after many other 20th century movements faded away.
So it's not just a historical curiosity, a relic of the past. Peronism is still a force to be reckoned with in Argentina today.
Absolutely. In fact, the current president of Argentina is a Peronist.
Wow, so Perón's legacy continues to shape Argentine politics even in the 21st century.
It does.
But with such a complex and often contradictory history, how do people view Peronism today?
It remains a deeply polarizing force.
Okay.
For some, Peronism represents a commitment to social justice, economic independence, and national sovereignty. They see Perón as a champion of the working class who modernized Argentina and gave it a voice on the world stage.
But for others, I imagine the darker aspects of his role, the authoritarian tendencies, are harder to overlook.
Yes, for many Argentines, Peronism is synonymous with populism, corruption, and the erosion of democratic norms.
Yeah.
They point to the suppression of dissent, the cult of personality that surrounded Perón and Evita,
Right.
and the economic instability that marked his later years in power.
So it's a mixed bag, a legacy full of both light and shadow. It seems impossible to talk about Peronism without acknowledging both its achievements and its failures.
Precisely, and this duality is what makes it so fascinating to study.
Yeah, I agree.
Peronism challenges us to think critically about the nature of power, the allure of populism, and the enduring quest for social justice.
You know, as we've been unpacking all of this, one question keeps coming back to me.
Okay.
Peronism positioned itself as this third way, distinct from both capitalism and communism.
Right.
But is that even a relevant distinction anymore? In today's world with globalization, technological disruption, and new challenges like climate change, do these old ideological categories even hold up?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if the quest for a third way was specific to the historical context of the Cold War, a time when the world was divided between these two competing ideological blocks.
Right. It was almost like choosing sides back then.
It was.
But the world has changed so much since then.
It has, and that raises a whole host of new questions. Can Peronism or any movement rooted in 20th century ideologies
Right.
truly address the complexities of our interconnected world?
It's hard to say.
Do we need to move beyond these grand narratives and focus on finding more pragmatic, localized solutions to our current challenges?
Those are questions we'll have to grapple with on our own.
We will.
But what this deep dive into Peronism has shown me is that history isn't just about memorizing dates and names.
Right.
It's about understanding the forces that have shaped our present and using that knowledge to navigate the future.
Well said. And perhaps the most valuable lesson we can take from Peronism is that there are rarely easy answers in politics.
Yeah,
It's a messy, complex, and often contradictory process.
definitely.
But by engaging with those complexities, by studying movements like Peronism, with all their triumphs and failures, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world we inhabit.
That's a great note to end on. This deep dive has been a whirlwind tour of Argentine history, political ideology, and the enduring legacy of one of the most compelling and controversial figures of the 20th century.
It has.
Hopefully, our listener is walking away with a newfound appreciation for the complexities of Peronism and a desire to explore these questions further.
I couldn't agree more. History is a conversation, not a lecture.
Right.
And I hope this deep dive has sparked a curiosity in our listener to continue that conversation.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.